Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm thrilled to welcome Alonso Duralde back to the podcast today to talk about What's Up, Doc, starring Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal, and directed by the late, great Peter Bogdanovich. Welcome, Alonso.
Thanks for having me. This is on the list of you better not talk about this movie without me things. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, this is one I did not reach out to you for. You said, "Can I be your guest for What's Up, Doc?" And I said, absolutely. This is fantastic. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. As I just said to you before we started recording, I had not seen this movie before.
Wow.
I have seen Last Picture Show a few times. I've seen Paper Moon 2 or 3 times. I don't know how this one escaped me, but
I think this might have been the biggest actual box office hit of his career, I think.
Yeah, I read it was the third highest grossing movie of 72. It made like 66 million, something crazy. Yeah, and to come out 5 months after Last Picture Show, like very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, as 3 movie runs go, and there's periodically on Twitter, people will talk about that's what for directors. I mean, Last Picture Show, What's Up, Doc, Paper Moon. That's just like bam, bam, bam. And for somebody who's just getting his career started, I think as we talk about Bogdanovich, who passed away recently, and obviously he's so tied into Orson Welles in so many ways. There are some weird parallels as far as like somebody who peaked early and then who Hollywood decided to turn their back on for various reasons. So even in that sense, like as much as Bogdanovich began as sort of his biographer and friend and whatever, like weirdly he wound up on a very Wellesian trajectory going through Hollywood, I think.
Yeah, they were very close, right? And even around this time in the early 70s, he was very close to Orson Welles.
Yeah, like there was a period in the early to mid 70s where Welles was living with Bogdanovich and Sybil Shepherd in their house in Bel Air, and almost burned it down once apparently with his cigars. Yeah, if you listen to Ben Mankiewicz, the first season of the TCM podcast, The Plot Thickens, is
great.
Just amazing conversations with Bogdanovich, and he tells that story about Welles living with him, which then leads to like these weird sort of like betrayals and things, and like oddly enough, Bogdanovich being in The Other Side of the Wind, playing a character who is the sort of like friend of / eclipsing the mentor, played by John Huston, is all very weirdly autobiographical.
Yeah, you think Welles would have said to him, "Don't start too strong, Peter. Like start just middle of the road.
Dial it down.
Like wait till your 5th film to really do a good one." Because that's not how it all panned out, right? But yeah, so we just lost Peter Bogdanovich. He was 82 years old. In terms of his filmmaking career, his life, like what stamp did he put on film history?
Well, I mean, obviously he is, I think, the strongest sort of connective tissue between like golden age Hollywood and the new Hollywood of the 1970s, because where you've got other people like Lucas and Spielberg and the sort of Scorsese, the film school generation of directors coming out of that period, who obviously were themselves steeped in vintage Hollywood. Bogdanovich was very much in direct contact with these folks. Like he was writing monographs about Ford and Welles and Howard Hawks and stuff for the Museum of Modern Art back in the early 60s. And then I think is maybe the closest we've had in the United States to what we saw in the French New Wave, where you had, people like Truffaut and Godard and Romer writing for Cahiers du Cinema about, Frank Tashlin and Howard Hawks and those kind of directors, and then becoming filmmakers themselves. And so I think Bogdanovich kind of goes on that arc. He says he never thought of himself as a film critic necessarily, but he was absolutely an academic and a biographer and an interviewer. So he brings all of that stuff with him to these movies. And we'll talk about like Welles is the one who told him to shoot Last Picture Show in black and white so that he could have the depth of focus that he wanted and that kind of thing. So he's very much like, dealing directly with these folks who were kind of, in their later years, out of fashion in Hollywood, maybe have a hard time getting films made at that point. But he's bringing their know-how and their input into what is considered this like bold, radical, rating system is gone and the auteurs are taking over the studios period of American filmmaking. And he's also, of course, part of that Roger Corman or group with, Coppola and Scorsese and all these other people who got their first shots making movies for him. I recently heard a quote from Ron Howard, who is another one of those guys. Like, his first feature was, Grand Theft Auto.
That's right.
For Corman, and Corman apparently told him, said, Ron, if you do a good job on this film, you'll never have to work for me again.
Yeah. Yeah, but his career is so interesting in that he has these huge successes early on. And then aren't the 3 films he makes after Paper Moon all box office flops, disappointments?
Basically, yeah. He makes those 3 films, yeah. And then the next one he does is Daisy Miller,
right?
Which is a Henry James adaptation with Sybil Shepherd in the lead. And as Bogdanovich would put it later, he goes, like, Merchant Ivory wasn't around then. People did not want to see that kind of period drama. So even though it wasn't a very expensive movie, it was part of a deal that he, Friedkin, and Coppola had made, where they had created this shingle at Paramount where they could do anything they wanted as long as the budget was like under $3 million or whatever. And so he made that film, and people were just like, and I think there was also this feeling of like, Sybil Shepherd had been a model. They cast her in Last Picture Show. He leaves Polly Platt for her.
Right.
And so there was a lot of judgment, I think, within Hollywood and sort of within the, kind of entertainment media of like, oh, he's trying to make her into a thing and trying to turn her into an actress, which as the years would bear out, she is an actress and she is talented and has a lot going for her. But at the time it was just like, oh, he's sticking his girlfriend in a corset and giving her a parasol and trying to make us take her seriously.
Yeah.
So then he follows that with At Long Last Love, which is a very ambitious, very expensive musical where it's all Cole Porter songs. He decides to do it the way that like Lubitsch did back in the 30s, which is everybody's singing live on set with like a earpiece, like no kind of like the fig leaf of post-production there. And it's Sybil Shepherd again and Burt Reynolds, neither of whom are necessarily like super famous for being singers or dancers, although Sybil had engineered an album for her called Sybil Does It to Cole Porter, where she sang a bunch of Cole Porter songs, and that also was released to a lot of raised eyebrows. I happen to be a fan of At Long Last Love. I think it's pretty great.
Okay.
And I like what he's going for. And but it tanked, and part of that was because the studio sort of rushed it into theaters without really doing a lot of testing beforehand, which with a musical especially you kind of have to do. Like that's why Broadway shows open in Boston or wherever before they launch on Broadway. And so and by that point, because Bogdanovich was such a wunderkind and such a like out of nowhere like bam with these 3 hits in a row, there were a lot of people who were very eager to see him fail. Like there's a Billy Wilder quote about how like people in Hollywood it's fractured and we don't get along, but we all came together to pop a champagne cork when Peter Bogdanovich had a flop, and it was like okay. And so I think again with the passage of time and the fact that Bogdanovich did finally get to do his director's cut and it's on Blu-ray now, I think I think At Long Last Love is it's it's not like people have decided it's a masterpiece, but it has a much better reputation now than it did then. So then he makes Nickelodeon, which is another sort of tribute to old Hollywood, but it's about like kind of feature filmmaking, like the early years of people like Alan Dwan, and again, based on a lot of anecdotes that he knew firsthand from these filmmakers that he had interviewed and stuff. But there was a lot of battle with the studio. But that one he wanted to be in black and white, and Paramount wouldn't let him. And
there you go.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on with that. I think there is now a black and white cut you can get on certain Blu-ray editions of that film, but that one tanked as well. So then he just was like, book, persona non grata. And then he kind of starts coming back with Saint Jack, which he makes fairly low budget, and it's very well received with Ben Gazzara, shot in Singapore. And then he makes They All Laughed, which is the film where he meets Dorothy Stratton and falls in love with her, and then she's brutally murdered by her ex-husband, and then he decides to sink his own money into the completion and distribution of the film after a battle with the studio, which is of course the last thing you ever do when he lost his shirt, lost the house in Bel Air. And, I think after that, it was just this kind of thing of like, he was still working, and like Mask was a hit, and, he had other films that matter, but like, it was this kind of constant uphill battle for him to sort of regain the ground that he had mastered early on. And I think by the end of his life, there is, like I said, there's a reevaluation of a lot of his films. There's a whole new generation of filmmakers who look to him the way that he looked to John Ford. his last feature film, She's Funny That Way. Wes Anderson and Noah Baumbach are among the executive producers. Quentin Tarantino has a cameo in it as himself. Like, these are all like fans of Bogdanovich's films who are now trying to like champion him. And then he also like makes these really great documentaries and books about old Hollywood. Like, his last film is the great Buster, about Buster Keaton, which came out in 2018, which I have not seen yet, but I hear is really good. And he's got like a handful of books that are just considered like some of the best writing about American film ever. Who the Devil May Do It, and those books where he interviews directors and stars of days past. So his filmmaking career has these ups and downs, but I think as somebody who is, like I said, a connection to old Hollywood and a chronicler of old Hollywood, he's essential.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of even the last few films he did weren't huge hits. He got an amazing ensemble cast. Like, in the last film he did, it also had Jennifer Aniston, Catherine Hahn, I believe, is in the last one.
Maybe Jennifer Aniston's in it, and Lucy Punch and Owen Wilson, and yeah, it's not a film that I love, and you can tell he's really trying to kind of hit on the "What's Up, Doc" formula again.
It's like Screwball.
Yeah, very much so, and like it's all in a hotel and that kind of thing. But there's some he brings a lot to it, and obviously is he's exceptionally talented, I think, and he's a director who I think was very open to trying to like be contemporary, but at the same time, with a foot in classic Hollywood. And I think in a lot of ways, I think he achieves that balance better than somebody like Quentin Tarantino, who is wearing his influences on his sleeve. Even in a film like What's Up, Doc, which is clearly borrowing so much from Bringing Up Baby structurally, it makes itself its own thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I feel like Bogdanovich is one of the most accomplished directors who also is just a really famous and great historian. He's also a really good actor. I remember really liking him on The Sopranos. He acted in some things. He would show up in things here and there, and I'd be like, oh, there he is. He was always really great. But yeah, his like any commentary I hear of his, like he has a great one on Citizen Kane, and like when he talks about film history, it's fascinating. So he's
for sure
really great figure in that way too.
Yeah, they talk about the directors who are good in a room, and like Bogdanovich was an amazing storyteller and raconteur, and gave good Q&A and does good DVD commentaries and stuff. So yeah, that's absolutely, I think, part of his legend. And of his later period films, like I think Noises Off is actually pretty damn funny, and that's a movie that shouldn't work at all because it's so intrinsically a stage piece, and he has to figure out how to make that clockwork kind of farce work on the screen, and I think for the most part he succeeds.
One film he made I'm intrigued to see, but I'm scared to see is Texasville, because I love Last Picture Show. Have you seen Texasville?
I have. Weirdly enough, one of my first jobs was at the USA Film Festival in Dallas.
Okay.
And in 1990, we hosted the world premiere of Texasville because he had shot it in Texas. And that's I have an autographed soundtrack to it, Long Last Love, that he, Sybil Shepherd, and Eileen Brennan all signed because they were all there for that movie. Probably, I mean Mercury probably shouldn't have gone back to that well, and I don't know that Bogdanovich necessarily should have either. It's an interesting curiosity, but it in no way augments the Last Picture Show legend. But say what you will about his later films. I mean, these first three, and I would also include Targets, right? Targets from '68 with Boris Karloff. Was a really cool discovery. I had never seen that before until a few years ago, and I really enjoyed that one too, the first one. I taught a film class years ago at Chapman, and it wasn't one that I had created, but I sort of stepped into it for a while. And the idea of the class was, how do you take roadblocks and sort of turn them into advantages? How do you work around stuff? And we talked about like the 5 obstructions and stuff like that. But I kind of now I wish I had known more then about Targets, because the whole premise of that movie was basically Corman saying, I've got, like, Karloff owes me 2 days on a movie. You've got to use footage from The Terror, and all these things that he had to do, and he found this way to make it all work really beautifully and to tell these 2 parallel stories, like knowing that he was only going to have Karloff for a certain period of time, but giving him this role to play that was like one of the great roles of his career, even though it's very autobiographical, but it he had started at like in the Universal horrors and ended at the Roger Corman factory, but this was a movie that kind of allowed him to really sort of reflect upon his career and do some genuine dramatic acting, which he was certainly capable of doing, but just had generally not been called upon to do so.
Yeah. So you only had him for 2 days. That's really
something
intimidating.
like that. Yeah, maybe not 2 days, but like he didn't have a lot of Karloff.
And you're right. It's one of his best performances. Makes me think of Donald Pleasance. They had him for 5 days on Halloween, and that's like maybe his most famous performance in a movie. 5 days of his long, many decades long career. So it's so interesting to see like Targets followed by Last Picture Show, so different. Yeah. And then he moves on to our movie today, What's Up, Doc? Which from my research, it sounded like there was talk of maybe doing a drama with Barbra Streisand, and it was Bogdanovich who said, no, I want to make a screwball comedy with Barbra Streisand. That was was that his call? Like he wanted to do comedy?
I think it was always going to be a comedy.
It was always going to be comedy.
I think that the reason that Barbra Streisand wanted to work with him was because he was the Last Picture Show guy, and I think she just assumed that whatever he was doing next was going to be along those lines, and was sort of surprised to find out otherwise. And I wish that it had not taken so long for her to embrace this movie and sort of understand how great she is in it.
She didn't like the movie in the beginning? Not
particularly. No, I think there was a definite chunk of time there where she sort of considered it like this goofy thing that was beneath her, but years later she did do kind of a DVD commentary, and it's not even a full commentary, but it's kind of her going, oh, that's funny. Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of it last night. I got the Blu-ray from the library, and it had her scene-specific commentary.
Exactly. Yes, that's how they describe it. And I think that she saw herself as more of a dramatic actress, and she certainly has that in her paint box. But this is for me, this is peak Barbra for me. Like she is filmed like a beautiful movie star.
Wow.
Her comic timing is crack on perfect, and just like she does. Christy Lemire and I just talked about this movie for our Breakfast All Day Patreon, and she talked about how like you would have to have somebody with that kind of, maybe not have to, but the fact that she has this musical training and is such a master at phrasing, than the way they do in the musical sense. She's able to rat-a-tat out that dialogue, and so often when it's about like science or poetry or like these really sort of like what could be just academic gibberish, she just crisply gets it all out as fast as possible and just like gets the pace exactly right.
Yeah, Barbra Streisand, I've watched most of her films leading up to this podcast. I had never seen Hello, Dolly before. I had never seen Owl and the Pussycat before. And I always kind of, knowing of her work when I was younger, I thought of her more as a dramatic actress. So it's been really fun to see these more comedic takes on these films. And I think she was just really astonishing in this. I read that Bogdanovich showed them the Lady Eve to prepare them for the movie. I'm assuming on set he was probably saying to them a lot, faster, say faster, right? to get that quip. I don't know if they had that there every day on set, like if they needed that direction, but like the dialogue is very quick, and I love that about it.
No, absolutely. And that's easier said than done. Like, one of the stories about the making of Clue is that Jonathan Lynn showed them all His Girl Friday.
Right.
And there are moments in that movie where, yes, they are kind of nailing that sort of that screwball rat-a-tat. And then there's other times where you can tell they're going too fast, or they're putting speed above inflection, and the lines aren't landing in the way they should. I know this is treasonous for people who adore Clue and think it's perfect. I love Clue, but I think there are times when the seams are showing. This movie never, like it's always, it all feels organic. It feels like this is the way that people are talking, which is what you really want to accomplish with movies like this. And it's interesting that he showed them the Lady Eve, because as we'll get into it, like this movie owes so much to Bringing Up Baby.
Yep. So when did you first see this movie? What has been your relationship with it? Did you see it when you were very young? Like when did you
I saw it in theaters. I was 5 years old.
Okay.
I have a lot of older siblings, and we all went, and I have the sketchiest memories of it. I remember it being funny. I think I kind of remember the car chase. And then I rediscovered it in college. We rented the VHS once, and it just blew my mind. I became obsessed with this movie. We watched it over and over again. We started quoting it all the time. Just like I remember getting to the use your charm moment and just howling at the resolution of that one, so yeah, it's a movie that with the exception of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which I have previously discussed on this program.
It's a good one.
This is probably the movie I've seen the most times.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it, and weirdly enough, it made me not a fan of Bringing Up Baby for a long time. Like, I saw it and I was like, it's okay, but it's not. And then it wasn't until we did them both on a film and a movie last year that I came to appreciate that Bringing Up Baby is also great, and that Katharine Hepburn's character is as wonderfully screw loose and devious but with good intent in the way that Barbra Streisand's Judy Maxwell is.
So this would have been your introduction to Bogdanovich if this was the first one you saw.
For sure. Yeah.
So absolutely. when did you go, oh, he also directed some of these other dramatic films? Like, oh, he's also a director of Last Picture Show too. Very different.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a period sort of before VCRs and before cable. Like, we got both of those things when I was in high school.
Okay.
So I did a lot of reading about movies without necessarily seeing movies. So I knew that the Last Picture Show existed. I had seen Paper Moon.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of knew that about him early on, that he was this guy who revived old genres. Basically, that was kind of his thing. I didn't know so much about the monographs and all that other stuff that would come along later, but yeah, I did know that he juggled very different genres that way.
So the screenplay was written by Robert Benton and David Newman, who had written Bonnie and Clyde, and then also Buck Henry. I believe Buck Henry came in second. Like, it was like two groups.
Yeah, Buck Henry worked off of their draft, and
right.
And obviously it depends on who you ask, but apparently Buck Henry is the one who came up with like all of the geology humor in the film that comes from him. And he might even have been the one who came up with the 4 suitcases. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what the structure, how the scripts play out, but definitely Buck Henry came in and put in a lot of the really funny back and forth dialogue stuff, which scans, because I think like Benton is, I think would later become more famous as like he's the Kramer versus Kramer and the Places in the Heart guy, and
Still the Night.
Yeah, exactly. But some funny stuff, like he did Nobody's Fool with Paul Newman, which
that's right, he did that.
Newman, on his as it would play out, like his Superman screenplay was completely rewritten by Tom Mankiewicz.
Okay.
Like his was very jokey and very inside referencey, winky, and like Tom Mankiewicz came in and took all of that out and made them play it straight, which is why that movie works. So I believe that Buck Henry, probably most of what we come away loving about this film might have come from him, but these things, again, it always depends on who you ask, and if you maybe dig through the Writers Guild archives and look at all the drafts and figure out who added what.
And I get, so Bogdanovich has a story credit for this. I don't know if he wrote much of the screenplay. I believe he was involved in the screenwriting process.
I suspect his story credit involved having seen Bringing Up Baby a lot of times, but who knows?
Yeah, because I guess he said, let's see, he was asked, if you're going to make a movie with Streisand, what kind of picture would you do? He said, oh, I don't know, a screwball comedy, something like Bringing Up Baby, daffy girl, square professor, everything works out all right. Well, and that's kind of what we get in the movie.
Bam, exactly.
And this was like in April, May of 1971, and they were shooting by the fall. Like, they were shooting just a few months later. So this happened very quickly. Like, by the time they thought of the project, within a year it was in theaters.
I forget the title now, but I think there was another film that had gone in development at Warner Brothers that was going to star like Elliot Gould and Kim Darby from True Grit, that wound up becoming this movie, although I think that one might have been more dramatic, and then they turned this one more into a comedy. But yeah, I mean, it's things get thrown together that way sometimes.
Yeah. So what do we love about this movie, Alonso? What has made it such an important film for you?
Well, I mean, I think the performances are so great. Like Ryan O'Neal has never been more charmingly befuddled. And the fact that coming off of Love Story, he's perfectly willing to make fun of Love Story at the end of the movie that's great. Of course, Streisand, like I said, just hitting all the marks and just a delight in this. And introducing Madeline Kahn.
Speaking of Clue, like one of my all-time favorites.
If you go back and look at Bringing Up Baby, the fiance of the Cary Grant befuddled scientist is barely a character. Like, she pops in enough to let you know that their marriage is going to be purely sort of like business and convenience, and they're not even going to kiss, but she's off screen for most of the movie. Whereas like Eunice is a character. and weirdly enough, Madeline Kahn, like Barbra Streisand, did not think of herself as funny and was not particularly interested in doing comedy, even though that's where she had a lot of her biggest triumphs. Yeah, I read there's a really good biography of Madeline Kahn that came out a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
And on top of it, I think she was annoyed by the fact that she was the frumpy one in this movie and Streisand got to be the sexy one. But it's a great, like, you leave humming Eunice, like she's so her reactions and her vocal inflections. Again, I think because Khan is a singer, she knows how to do that, like that she's doing with her voice in this film. From the I'm counting to 10, like from down there to up, where she's all frazzled and freaked out when she's, with a room full of kidnappers. The car chase, I think, is one of the greatest ever filmed for a comedy film, action film, anything, and just I've seen this movie enough times where I've literally watched the cases, and the cases are always where they're supposed to be, and that's a tricky thing in farce. You have to make sure that each suitcase is where it's intended to be, so that when they all finally wind up in the same place, the right ones are there. I just think this movie is just so snappy and funny and quotable, and it's just the pacing is always, like, they know how to slow down and take a breath after something crazy has happened. So like, you've got this amazing car chase, which goes on for quite a while. It's super elaborate, lots of great physical gags and payoffs. Then there's this literal, like, movie just kind of stops and takes a breath to set up the character of the judge at night court.
With his pills
and the strings on his finger and all that stuff. And then boom, everybody comes back into the courtroom and it's more chaos. And it's like, so it's just that kind of like crazy breathe. It's important, and the movie's not hitting you over the head with it, but it's doing that. And that's what makes it so fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the highest praise I can give this movie is that when it ended, I said I thought I'd been watching it for like maybe an hour. Like, it went by so fast. Like, usually, in a comedy, you kind of like in the second half, it starts slowing down a little bit, lags, and that's not the case here. Like, and another thing I really loved was that it wasn't just constantly zany. There's not this crazy music score over every scene. Like, he doesn't have a whole lot of music in the movie. He lets the dialogue and the performances play out scene to scene. It's not moving too fast, which I like.
Actually, if you pay attention to most of the diegetic music in the movie is or I guess non-diegetic, because it's coming from the elevator at the hotel or like the lobby of the hotel. It's almost all Cole Porter.
Oh, which you would have in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And it opens and closes with "You're the Top." So obviously you had Porter on the brain well before doing At Long Last Love. But yeah, it doesn't. It's I guess it's frantic, but it's not frenetic. And I know that's a thin line, but it's very energetic and very like anarchic, but it's not like completely spinning out of control.
Yeah. And Ryan O'Neal, so on the Love Story episode we did, I talked about, I found his acting a little stiff here and there in that movie. And I feel like some of that like worked well for this performance because he's kind of poking fun at himself a little bit in this. And I found this to be the most charming I've ever seen O'Neal in a movie.
Well, he and Streisand had dated, like they had been a couple before this. And so they had, I think, a certain level of chemistry and ease with each other. But yeah, I think he's doing that thing of like, I'm this insanely handsome person playing a nebbish, I have the glasses on, I'm henpecked and I'm whatever. And so it gives him something to do rather than just sort of stand there and be kind of blandly handsome, which is mostly what he's called upon to do in Love Story. So yeah, I think that helps a lot. But like, the whole thing, like when he is down to his undershorts, it's like, there is not an Iowa musicologist on earth with that body, right? I mean,
Exactly.
let's be real for a second.
Both O'Neill and Streisand look better than ever. I mean, I watched your Breakfast All Day with Ben Mankiewicz, and he said like Streisand in this movie is one of the best a person has ever looked in a film.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree. Like, she is just stunning in this film.
Yeah, when he takes the cover off that piano and she's lying there, it's like she's gorgeous in this movie. And I think she's obviously a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
And there are moments in like Funny Girl and The Way We Were where they really like shoot her to her advantage. But yeah, this movie, start to finish, she's never been more beautiful.
Yeah, she's got this tan and the costume design and the way she carries herself throughout the movie with such confidence, and she's kind of quirky, and it's I feel like it's a performance of hers I have not seen before. It was just a really kind of a clever use of Barbra Streisand in this movie.
Yeah, I sort of wish she had made more films like this. And it's like, she did the occasional stab at comedy with like, she and O'Neill were reunited for The Main Event, which is not a particularly good movie.
In 79, I think.
Yes. And she had like Up the Sandbox, which is an ambitious film that didn't do well, but I think actually has aged well because it almost sort of borders into like sort of revolutionary surrealism, but in a studio comedy kind of way. I don't know.
That's also 72.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like on the cusp. I know nothing really about that movie except that she's in it. So I'm not sure if I'm doing it.
From the director of The Empire Strikes Back.
Irvin Kershner.
Yes. Not a big hit, but like she's sort of I think she's a housewife, but she has these sort of fantasies about like other existences she could have where she's like a revolutionary or whatever. And it I don't know, it's good. It's not What's Up Doc level, but it is a film I think that people have come to appreciate more with the passage of time.
Yeah, she slowed down much later when she became a director, but the 70s, she is very prolific. Almost every year she has at least one film. I looked at Wikipedia under the Screwball Comedies section, and it said another one. It was called, I think, For Pete's Sake from 74.
Yeah, For Pete's Sake, again, it's okay. I think that one's trying too hard. That's a movie that really makes you appreciate the sure hand that Bogdanovich has.
Okay.
In things like pacing and the stuff here, but like as with so many of the great screwball comedies of the past, where you have you would have this deep bench of great character actors of Eugene Pallette and whoever else would pop up. Here you've got like Kenneth Mars and Austin Pendleton,
Michael Murphy,
Mabel, I'm forgetting her name, who plays Mrs. Hoskins. Just like a really just a great crew of folks. Even if they just pop in for like Sorrel Book, come on, Boss Hogg, pops in for a line or two. Like
Randy Quaid is like
Randy Quaid, baby Randy Quaid, like
scene,
right after Last Picture Show.
Yeah. So yeah, really had a lot of fun.
Mabel Albertson, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Liam Dunn is the judge. Let's not forget. John Hillerman,
So, and they have great chemistry, O'Neill and Streisand, in this. I'm curious to see their other film together. There's just the one other film right now. It's not good.
The Main Event is, I mean, look, they still are they are a movie star couple, in that movie, but it's pretty contrived and kind of grating, unfortunately. Really good theme song sung by Streisand.
Okay.
But yeah, the What's Up Doc, I think is magic. It's lightning that's hard to make strike twice.
Yeah. What do you think of so we do get her singing in the movie. We get her singing was it As Time Goes By from Casablanca?
Yeah, so time goes by, and then like I said, bracketing with You're the Top as well. Yeah, I mean, she's here. Let's have her sing. Why not?
Exactly. I'm like, is that why I'm watching this last time? Like, is that why the scene is happening? Because it's her. We have to have her sing something.
You could do worse, No, I think it's a fun bit, and I love that he doesn't know the song, but of course she can tell him C minor seventh, and he's a musicologist, he knows these things. What I read somewhere about her recording of You're the Top, which I think is great, and talk about somebody who knows her phrasing. Apparently they did a whole bunch of takes, and then she'd be like, okay, for this line take 6, and then for that next line 17, and that, like, she would remember every way that she had done it and which phrase or line or part of the song was the best version of it. Like that's how much of
Oh,
a
okay.
perfectionist she is. And I adore it. Like for years I was trying to find a recording of that and it didn't exist until they put out this big Barbra box set in the like late 90s. I forget. It was like a 6 CD set and it had all these sort of like, outtakes and B-sides and whatever, and it has the entirety of You're the Top, both the opening credits version and the closing credits version where Ryan O'Neal comes in, and so like I own it now.
So they didn't have a soundtrack to this in the 70s?
They did not release a soundtrack for this.
Oh, interesting. So that's such a big hit, you'd think they'd have something.
I think later eras of movie, of Hollywood, they would have figured out a way to do that, but at the time they didn't. And I'm sure it was a thing where like Warner Brothers Records would have wanted to release it, but she was signed to Columbia, and there's all that sort of weirdness that comes in when it comes to working out contracts for stuff. But yeah, so if you buy the collection they put out, which I cannot remember what it's called, but it's if you're a Barbra fan, you already have it. It's in there.
She had one that was like movie songs or something. It's not a part of that.
No, those were all songs that were written for films. Which, by the way, we just lost Peter Bogdanovich, but also Marilyn Bergman, who is half of the team of Alan and Marilyn Bergman. They wrote the lyrics to The Way We Were. They wrote the lyrics to all the songs from Yentl. So they had a lot of connection to Streisand. In addition to writing like every major movie song, it feels like from a chunk of the 60s and 70s, they wrote The Windmills of Your Mind and The Summer Knows. They wrote the lyrics to the theme songs to Maude, Good Times, and Alice. Like these are major films.
And we lost Leslie Bricusse recently too, didn't?
Yes, we did.
We talked about his work obviously on both of the films we did before.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, it's a shame that these people are gone now.
Well, you're doing a show about 50-year-old movies. It's going to come up.
It's going to come up. If this was filmed at 10, there wouldn't be as much.
You'd have better. You might actually have guests on this show that worked on the damn thing.
That's right. Every month I'm like, who could I get from Cabaret and The Godfather? And I'm like, some of them are still around, but it's gonna be tricky. I got Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka, and that was a win for me. I was happy with that.
Hey, you know what? Like Coppola is like they're doing this reissue of The Godfather. They're putting out the 4K in March, and they're putting like Rialto is doing new reissues for like The Conversation and Apocalypse Now and a handful of his other Dementia 13. So maybe he's out there, he might be out there on the publicity circuit. You should ask.
I should ask. I did get a chance to meet him once and he brushed me off. He was like, go away, kid. But maybe he can make it up to me.
I did a very nice phoner with him for like 10 minutes once when one of the Blu-ray editions for Apocalypse Now, and it's a good chat.
Yeah, no, that'd be cool. Yeah, I might reach out to him. That would be something. But let's see. So you mentioned Madeline Kahn. She pops up in a movie, and I'm very happy. And this was her first movie. It says introducing Madeline Kahn at the beginning. I was like, this is her first movie. She'll just have a scene or two or something. It's like a big part, which I was very happy to see.
Yeah, she had been established as, I think she had done some stage stuff in New York. She had done a short film that had, I think, got an Oscar nomination and a lot of attention called Diduva, which is like a parody of Ingmar Bergman movies. And it's her and George Coe, who from like, he was in the original cast of Company, and he his voice. He did a lot of commercial work later on, but he was I think he was briefly involved in like the very first season of SNL even. But it's shot in black and white, and it's people just sort of like doing very kind of like suffering Bergman poses, and they might even be speaking like gibberish Swedish. It's pretty funny. Yeah,
but she's a part of one of my favorite scenes early in the movie that opens with Streisand in the bathtub and her like calling in and he's like, oh, that's just the TV. And it's like playing a war movie. And she's like, well, why is it a woman speaking? That scene's really funny. I wish I had seen this in a theater with a big audience. It was kind of hard to watch this by myself. I'm like, man, this would play so much better in a big group. Yeah.
What's really funny is if you go to like a repertory screening of it now, I hosted one years ago in Dallas. People start laughing at the beginning of scenes, knowing what's about to happen. Like they're already anticipating it, where it's going to go. But yeah, like that scene, perfect example where he walks into his room, she's in his bathtub, and it just keeps escalating.
Yeah.
And it keeps, and then Eunice is calling, and then he's turning the TV up, and then other people are pounding on the door, and then her room service order shows up, and then the curtains catch on fire because he's pulled the closed circuit
It just keeps going
out of the wall, and then she's on the ledge of the building, and
falls off the ledge.
falls off the ledge and climbs back on, and then like the fire department comes in. Like it's just one thing after another, and like that is like Marx Brothers stateroom in Night at the Opera level of like taking the joke and then more complication.
And like Madeline Kahn can take a very boring line and turn it into something amazing. What does she say? Like she says like I'm coming down or something.
I'm coming in.
And I'm like, most actors would have said I'm coming in, just said it just like the way I'm coming in. Like, it's just, and on the commentary I watched a little bit of Bogdanovich talks over the whole movie, and he said like that was an example of a line that just the whole crew just busted up laughing because it's just written very simply in the script, and she takes that and it just brings it to something another level. That's what I love about Kahn.
It's that thing about there's no small parts. I think a really great character actor could just take this little thing, and I mean, like, okay, later in the film with when everybody's in the night court, I don't know if you notice, one of the court's officers is played by M. Emmett Walsh.
Right. Yeah, he's been very briefly in the movie.
It's a very small role, but it's just his timing of like when he's just sort of like dryly reciting what they're being charged with. It's like most of them been stolen cars.
Yeah.
Oh, and then there was a kidnap. It's just like what, and he's just so like dryly punctuating each thing. Like you remember that performance, even though he's barely in the movie. So, also in that scene, by the way, is Mary Kay Place. I don't know if you spotted her.
Oh, I did not see. She's in that too.
There's two police women who come in and put the 4 cases on the judge's desk, and she's one of them.
That's hilarious. But yeah, Kahn is a year away from Paper Moon, which you would collaborate with Bogdanovich again. That was, I believe, her first Oscar nomination for Paper Moon. And then she got nominated for Blazing Saddles the year later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and again, talk about directors like pumping out the hits. Like in 74, Brooks puts out Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, both of which have really plum roles for Madeline Kahn.
Yeah. So she was more interested in drama, you said earlier. So like if her first film had been a dramatic film, would she have gone on that track? I wonder.
She was, I think, really wanted. I mean, she had trained as an opera singer.
Oh, okay.
Oh, she was really more interested in being like a, I think musical theater. And if it's not like she was averse to comedy. She just didn't think of it as one of her strong suits, even though it clearly was, and it wasn't something she was particularly interested in doing. But obviously she, did great work with Bogdanovich and with Mel Brooks, and maybe it's not looking for the laugh is how she finds them, but she's a genius.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see as we go on with this podcast, like to see her in more and more films. I'm sure there's some others from the 70s I have not seen yet, and I just love her. What an amazing film debut to be in. I mean, just really cool. So yeah, let's talk about the zany, long car chase, bike chase,
Chinese dragon chase.
Because I mean, up until that sequence, I mean, in terms of like camera work and like staging, there's nothing that Bogdanovich is doing like really like, out of the ordinary, right? It's film. I mean, in terms of the way it's shot, there's nothing really until we get to the chase, and then we're really upping the ante on like the camera work and the editing and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the editing, you don't notice it so much, but in a scene like that, where the hotel room scene like that, that plays a key role in it. But yes, this is definitely, now we're pulling out all the stops literally. And I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but Christy was telling me that there's this guy who in San Francisco who writes about movies that were shot there and how apparently like this car chase takes you all over the city. Like it makes no geographical sense if you actually know the city. Like they're in one part of town and they're in another, like they go from like Russian Hill to the Embarcadero or something, like in 2 seconds. But yeah, it is this brilliant, like ever escalating thing. Like there's one gag involving a pane of glass, which is one of the great, like Buster Keaton would tip his hat at the elaborate setup and the setup and the setup and the setup and the payoff. Like it's so great.
Everything with the pane of glass. I mean, they go past it, and you're like, okay, well, that's the joke. But then she's all like Streisand's almost to the top of that,
and then pedaling the delivery bike. Yeah,
and they're just like, whoa. It's just so silly. I love it.
And you could divide it into segments. There's like the wet cement part, and there's the
hitting the van over
hitting
and over.
hitting the van over and over again. Like, yeah, they just again, it's all about timing and pacing and just like setup, payoff, and it all just works out so brilliantly. And then there's just these like odd touches that you don't even notice the first time. Like, did you notice when they drive into the Chinese New Year's Day parade and wind up taking the dragon, what song is being played on the xylophone by all the Chinese marchers?
No, what is it?
It's La Cucaracha.
Oh, okay.
Why are they playing La Cucaracha in a Chinese New Year's parade? For no reason, but they're doing it. And at first you think it's like some some folk song that you don't recognize. You're like, wait, that's La Cucaracha. Like, just gags like that I love.
Yeah, maybe my favorite gag of all, which according to the commentary was suggested by Sybil Shepherd, is the gag of the guy walking down the sidewalk and the trash cans start chasing him, and he just leaps over that and he falls on top of that like restaurant like table with all those people.
Oh God, that's set up so brilliantly because they've driven by, they've knocked down all these garbage cans on a hill because it's San Francisco, and this dude is walking down the street and like one garbage can can rolling down,
he looks
and then a couple more, and it's like he's suddenly being chased by them, and so he jumps over a fence, he lands square onto a table at a restaurant, and one of the patrons looks straight up in the air like somebody else is going to come falling down, like it's raining men. It's like that's just a little that's 20 seconds of the movie, but it's
20 seconds did not need to be there, and it's incredible. I found that joke really funny.
That's the kind of thing, like in a comedy, you could just sort of find those little grace notes. Interestingly, he was living with Sybil Shepherd at the time. And had separated from Polly Platt, but she was trying to get into the production design guild, which would be something that she could do if she could work on this big studio movie. So they basically had this arrangement where she would work on the film and Sybil Shepherd was not allowed to visit the set ever.
Oh, okay. Right. That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's how they did it. And I think they did the same thing on Paper Moon as well. And, obviously I think Polly Platt plays a huge role in what makes these early films so great. Like, she actually has a story credit on Target. So she that come together, and she put so much of herself into these 3 hits in a row that, one could make the case that without Polly Platt, like, that's part of why Bogdanovich was not as successful after that. And I have not gone back and listened to it yet, but apparently on You Must Remember This, Karina Longworth did a couple of episodes devoted to Platt, and it aired using like recordings from a memoir that she wound up never finishing. So I'd love to hear that, and just to balance it with Bogdanovich's version of all of this that he talks about in the podcast with Ben Mankiewicz.
Interesting. Yeah, so the chase sequence, he said it cost a quarter of the budget. About $1 million of the $4 million budget was just for that chase.
I believe
and it was a 4-week shoot just for the chase sequence, which I makes sense. Like, I imagine a lot of those setups, and like that's not something you just do in an hour and then move on. Like, that's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
And remember, these are all practical effects. There is no CG going on here. They had to have an actual pane of glass and break it however many times they had to break it, or replace it if they broke it too early, all of that stuff. Everything you're seeing is stunt drivers and stunt performers, and apparently when the cars drive down the stairs, those stairs are still damaged from that shoot, and they've never allowed anybody else to shoot anything there because they're still broken from when What's Up Doc was made 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it in the movie. Like, you see the steps, like by the time the last car is going down, you see them crumbling a little bit, and you're like, I don't think that was meant to happen.
That's not an effect.
And they just never fixed them.
Apparently not. I mean, you'd think the city would have charged, the production for it, but I guess not.
Just never let anyone shoot there again.
Yeah.
And then of course the sequence ends with everyone going into the water, which I feel like it needed a big ending, right? So that's the one they came up with. And then you just see their car floating for no apparent reason. I'm like, wouldn't that sink?
I'm not sure if VW bugs are buoyant or not. I've never tested it, but
Yeah, so that, I mean, obviously you can't come away from this movie without like just singing the praises of that sequence. It was so fantastic. Any other sequence in the movie you find really funny, really great? I like their meet cutes.
I say the meat
drugstore.
is the meat, the whole, again, escalating. She goes from completely flummoxing in conversation and like being able to talk to him about rocks on a level that he wasn't expecting from this stranger, and then she and then she starts tormenting him with like telling the druggist that they're on their honeymoon and charge him for the radio. And then her first meeting with Eunice, and the meaning of propriety, like all of that gold. Like I said, the use your charm is very funny. The musicologist dinner where Judy first pretends to be Eunice Burns is brilliantly funny.
Going under the table.
And just, I mean, even a lot of times in movies, you can tell they're just sort of treading water until they get to the good stuff. And this movie is all good stuff, because from the moment that Ryan O'Neal walks into that room with an upside down name tag, like they're off to the races and figuring out ways to like find these gags. And we meet Kenneth Mars's utterly obnoxious Hugh Simon, who was a very mean parody of famous film critic John Simon, who spoke with that kind of Eastern European accent. So they're completely like goofing on this guy by name in this movie, which like 1972 cineast audiences would have known that's what they were doing.
And I also loved her gag of it happens at least twice, if not 3 times, where she rips a part of his clothes.
Yes.
Out of Laurel and Hardy, one of my favorites.
And right out of Bringing Up Baby, there's a scene where he accidentally tears off the back of her dress and like her ass is exposed in a restaurant. He's got to like walk behind her with a top hat and she doesn't know, and she's like, "What are you doing? Get away from me!" He's like, "Nah." So Bogdanovich, like you see movies that are referential and that are homage or whatever, and very often it's just sort of like, "Hey, remember how that you thought this was funny in that other movie? We're going to do it again." But this movie, I feel like he's taking the essence of what Hawks is doing, and certain amount of the plot structure, but absolutely coming up with new and different and funny and outrageous things to do with it. And the car chase is completely his creation. Like there's nothing like that in Bringing Up Baby at all.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And what's cool is that, I mean, were screwball comedies really big in the early 70s? I mean, the fact that the audience embraced this so much was really neat.
I mean,
too.
the poster for this movie said it's a screwball comedy. Remember them?
Remember them.
So yeah, I mean, as a form, it had fallen out of favor because I think the screwball comedy is very much tied to the Depression. It's very much tied to like, let's watch rich people be ridiculous.
Yeah.
But Bogdanovich was part of a wave of kind of a new appreciation of old Hollywood forms and tropes that was happening around that time. You were starting to see like repertory cinema and like this new a new embrace of like the Marx Brothers and Casablanca and all these kind of figures of yore. Like I was told the story that like the reason that I got into movies was because my oldest brother, who's 12 years older than me, went to Harvard in the early 70s, and he came back with all these books about like Greta Garbo and MGM, and like he was just steeped in that kind of like new era of cinephilia that was happening among people of that people in their 20s and upward in the early 70s. Like, I mean, I remember a lot of, as a really little kid, suddenly like there was this real W.C. Fields resurgence, and he would be referenced a lot, and there was a Fritos commercial that had somebody who was very W.C. Fields like, I remember, and so that stuff was in the air, but yeah, nobody had made an actual screwball comedy probably in some time.
So you think in 72 there might have been some pushback, like, oh, we don't really know what these kind of movies are, but that wasn't the case, which is really great. Sometimes when a genre has fallen out of favor and someone tries to do it again, audiences push back, right? And that wasn't the case here.
Well, I think it's one thing where if you are trying to say revive the Western,
Mm-hmm.
as happened also in that period, you kind of had to do it with a certain amount of revisionism. You had to sort of address, oh yes, by the way, we also committed genocide on the indigenous people of this country, as we were making our way through the making our way westward, and so I think in a movie like this, yes, it's a screwball comedy, but you've got like Barbra Streisand, who is a very hot movie star,
Right.
and Ryan
That
O'Neal,
helps.
who is coming off of this very hot, very successful, love story
Right.
movie, and so people don't feel like you are necessarily selling them something old and tired and that they're not interested in, because if you have enough trappings that make it feel new and contemporary, then you can kind of breathe new life into familiar tropes.
Yeah, I feel like very little of what Streisand did around this time was a flop. I feel like most of her films in the early 70s did okay, at least.
Yeah, I mean, like in the, because here's the thing, like Funny Girl, huge success,
Right.
Wins an Academy Award. Hello Dolly was a disaster.
So that movie didn't make any money. Hello Dolly.
No, that was, and there's a great book called Roadshow. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. It's about how, like, after the huge success of Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, that every studio chased that dragon and made a massively expensive flop musical.
Right.
And so for Fox, it was Hello Dolly. And between the fact that like the cost overruns were crazy and that they couldn't open the film until the Broadway show closed, which meant it actually sat on the shelf for like a year, accruing interest charges. Like that's why the Fox lot sold off. That's why Century City exists, because Fox sold off big chunks of the lot to like to pay for that movie and Cleopatra and some other duds they'd had at that moment. But that didn't do well. On a Clear Day You Can See Forever didn't do well.
Right. Vincent Minnelli.
Yeah. But I think she was making her way into
Getting
movies
better.
like this and for Pete's sake or whatever, and those were maybe doing a little better.
Yeah, we talked about this with Scrooge and Willy Wonka, how those two movies weren't huge hits at the box office. I feel like Willy Wonka did okay. Scrooge was kind of a disappointment, right, at the box office.
I think Scrooge did okay. I mean, both films were very much coming at the tail end of that mega musical period, and while Scrooge was probably pretty pricey, it wasn't like Star with Julie Andrews or something where they really were losing their shirt on it. And Willy Wonka was very much designed to be a smaller scale kind of film and wasn't meant to be like a big roadshow movie where we're going to open it exclusively in one theater, blah blah blah. But yeah, it did tank at the time, and so did the Quaker Oats funded the movie because they wanted to make a line of candy based on it, and that tanked too. But in time it has become a cult favorite, and now I think I'm surely between like all the home video iterations and the reissues, whatnot, I'm sure now it's become a cash cow for them.
But a lot of musicals in the early 70s weren't doing so well. Why was Fiddler on the Roof the highest grossing movie of 71?
Well, and they talked about this in Roadshow. Like that movie was very much an outlier.
Yeah.
But I think what happened with Fiddler on the Roof was it's not a star vehicle. They cast Topol. They didn't cast, like
Jack Nicholson or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think so many of the musicals from that period had flopped because they, we didn't have MGM anymore. We weren't creating like singing, dancing stars of like the Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire variety. But you had to have a big name in the movie to sell the film, which meant, okay, Richard Harris will be in Camelot, or Lee Marvin will be in Paint Your Wagon. It's like, so, I think they didn't go that route at all. And you look at that film and it's not like soundstage shtetl,
right.
They went to Yugoslavia or wherever it was they shot it, and it felt very, the filmmaking style was of that period. It's like, okay, we hired the guy who directed In the Heat of the Night to make Fiddler on the Roof.
Norman Jewison,
it's gonna look kind of gritty, and it's gonna be a lot of outdoor shooting and a lot of locations, and so I think that made it palatable for audiences who were maybe burned out on the bloat and the sort of artificiality of many of that period musicals.
That's an interesting perspective, because on that episode we did a few months ago, I was kind of confused because so many musicals had failed. I was like, why did this hit such a nerve?
It was the last of the successful ones, I think.
In fact,
I think not long after, you had one of the biggest flops of all of them, which was, I think, kind of the very end of the Roadshow period, and that was Man of La Mancha.
Oh, okay. Yep, that's 72. We just talked about Cabaret, which is a different kind of musical. right?
Absolutely. That was, and they were totally pushing back against that notion
Mhm.
of what a musical even was at that period.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. Interesting time for that genre here, and a resurgence a little bit, at least, for the screwball comedy. So anything else you wanted to say about What's Up, Doc? Anything we haven't touched on? Anything more about the direction or the performances or any other scenes you wanted to mention?
Yeah, no, I think we covered it. I mean, it's just it is a movie that absolutely holds up, and it doesn't feel like a product of 1972
Right.
in a
That's a
lot of
great
ways,
point. It does feel more contemporary. I was watching it last night, and it's just striking, just Blu-ray transfer. It looked great. And I'm like, this
Yeah.
doesn't feel like 72. It feels like more like maybe even 80s. Like there's something about the look of the movie. And
Yeah,
that's the case of Last Picture Show too. That film does not feel like it has to be 71.
Sure, but that's a movie that's designed to
look older.
It's
Exactly. So it's almost the other way.
Yeah, it's a period piece and it's shot in black and white.
Yeah.
So I mean, if anything, it falls into the category of, like, I remember when I interviewed Richard Linklater about Dazed and Confused, and I brought up American Graffiti, and he said that movie was influential to me because I wanted to make a movie that looked like it was shot in the year when it was made, or when it's set, rather. So like he wanted, so Linklater wanted to make a 76 set movie that looked like it was shot in 1976, which I think Licorice Pizza does that really well right now. And Last Picture Show is set in what,
1951,
20
years earlier.
So that looks like a movie that could have been made in 1951, even though it was set later. And so with What's Up, Doc, you have the opposite, where it's not, it is not a period piece, but it's also not like so crushingly of its moment that it becomes instantly dated. Like, apart from like Mabel Albertson's go-go boots, pretty much everything in the movie is pretty like timeless. And so you can watch it now and it doesn't feel like you're watching this sort of like, time capsule piece.
Yeah, it was a great discovery. I had been aware of the movie for a long time. As I said, I'd seen Last Picture Show and Paper Moon more than once, so I don't know why this escaped me, but I'm very happy I finally got a chance to see it. It's just the quickest 94 minutes. Like, it's just so much fun. It's a lot of fun.
And I'll say this, there are a lot of people who, for I think often dumb reasons, decide they don't like Barbra Streisand. Give her a shot in this one. This might be the one where it all works for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are I feel like, I would read that growing up. Like, some people, Streisand, great singer, not so much of a great actress, but I have not, like, or even the earlier films I've looked at that weren't huge hits, I've always really admired her as an actress. I think she's really underrated in that way. She's great in this.
For sure. No, she's, I think, super talented. I think, as a director, she's successful. I think Yentl is a great movie and it absolutely holds up. Yeah. But yeah, I think if you have let the public image of Barbra Streisand color your judgment of her, and you think that she's, obnoxious or whatever, like, give her a shot in this movie. She's so charming. She's so funny.
Yeah.
I can't imagine anybody coming away with this not like loving. You don't have to love her entire filmography, but you will love her in this.
Yeah. So if you're listening, Barbara, I'd love to have you come on as a guest. Lots of great 70s films you're in. I'd love to talk to you about.
That Way We Were episode's coming up.
Way We Were 2023 with Redford. All right. So that takes us to our final two segments. The first is called the Divine Double Feature. That's where we pick a more modern film to pair with this. What did you go with for a more modern film that people could put on right after this ends?
Well, it's funny. My first thought was Noises Off, because it is also sort of a farce, but it's not really modern because it's like 30 years old at this point.
Yeah, close enough.
So I went with a film from recent years that I think is hysterically funny and has the same kind of clockwork, setup, payoff structure that this movie has, with like long payoffs of like things that happen early on that become important later, and is hilarious. And that would be Game Night.
Oh, I really love Game Night. That was a fun one.
Yeah. So like, that's a movie where you have these sort of scenes of escalating frustration. The whole scene with the dog, getting stained red, like all these things. I think it's a really great movie, and it's not like it borrows from What's Up, Doc, but I think they both are very smart and assured about the way that they sort of build the comedy.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I think Rachel McAdams is a kind of an underrated comedian. She's very funny in that.
Her delivery of the line, "Oh, he died," is genius.
And Jesse Peretz, that's his name, right?
Jesse Plemons.
Jesse Plemons. Jesse Plemons is hilarious in
Jesse
Game Night.
Plemons, if the Academy took comedy more seriously, that would have been an Oscar nominated performance. One of the greatest deadpans I've ever seen. I love his work in that movie so much.
Yeah, that scene, he's like in the cul-de-sac talking to them on like by the driveway. I just remember
About the Doritos,
I
yes.
was losing it. It was so funny. Like, he is great in that. Jesse Plemons. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a great choice. I went with a movie I adored in high school. I haven't seen it in a while. So it's 21 years old, not super modern, but Rat Race from 2001.
Oh, yeah. I love Rat Race.
I remember I had a big group of friends. We went to that one. It was like junior year of high school, and we just laughed our asses off that whole movie. That movie is a lot of fun and a great ensemble cast.
Yes, very much so. I mean, it is definitely has a lot of DNA in common with It's a Mad World.
Right.
Very funny, and some wonderfully surprising cameos too.
Yeah, I interned for Jerry Zucker for a semester when I was in college, and that's the film of his. I never mentioned Ghost. I talked about the Rat Race being a great, and I believe that's still the last film he directed 21 years ago. I don't think Jerry Zucker has made another film as a director.
Right. Yeah, because he did like that King Arthur movie, right? With First Night.
Yeah, First Night from 95. That was, so it was Ghost, First Night, and then Rat Race. And I worked for him in 2007 or 06, and he was working on something. So I guess that one never came to fruition. I don't know.
I don't know what he's up to. I don't know what Jim Abrams is up to.
Yeah, what are those guys doing?
I know David is like a right-wing lunatic now.
Oh, okay.
He made that American Carol movie, which is just dreadful.
Yeah, but Rat Race, it has so many great people in it, and then there'll be like Kathy Bates shows up as like as a one scene cameo. And
yes, but a memorable one.
So that's a fun one too. All right, so our last segment is Beyond the Flick. I wanted to do I have not done Streisand yet, but we have lots of film of hers to get to. I know one of these where it's really just about all her. I think I'll do a segment on Streisand then. This one, I'd love to hear your favorite screwball comedies. Looking at the list, I'm like, oh, there's so many 30s and 40s films I have not seen yet. So what are your recommendations in that subgenre?
I'm a big fan. I think they're a blast. So my first one I think would be a movie you mentioned earlier, The Lady Eve. Preston Sturges comedy with the sort of a befuddled academic and a woman who's out to upheave his life. But in this case, Henry Fonda is a wealthy heir who is also like, is it butterflies? Forget it's
been a while. Yeah,
something insects, something like that. Like he travels the world finding them, and he's sort of like up in his own head in his own ivory tower. And Barbara Stanwyck plays a con artist who decides to like seduce him, marry him, and then like take him for his money. But of course, falls in love with him because it's a screwball comedy, and that's how things work. Incredibly fast-paced dialogue, very sharp, very funny, and again a great deep bench of character actors. So that one's a lot of fun.
Okay.
I would recommend My Man Godfrey. I think absolutely is.
I've never seen that one.
One of the cornerstones of the screwball genre, in which Carol Lombard plays a daffy heiress, and she takes in a forgotten man, played by William Powell, to be her protege and to be the family butler, and complications ensue. But that one's a lot of fun and just endlessly hilarious. And then I'm going to give you a double feature of Claudette Colbert / Mary Astor movies that I love. One of which is another Sturges, The Palm Beach Story.
Okay.
And then also a film that they did, which very frustratingly disappears from streaming a lot. Like it won't be available, and then Criterion just had it as part of a Mitchell Leeson collection, and then it went away again. So if you can't find it streaming right now, I feel your pain, but either buy the physical media or be patient, it'll pop up again. A movie called Midnight.
Oh,
where Claudia Colbert plays a showgirl in Paris who is penniless. Don Amici is a cab driver who falls in love with her, but John Barrymore is trying to get his wife Mary Astor to stop like flirting with this other dude. So he basically sets up Colbert as he pays for everything. He kind of turns her into this society woman so that she can seduce Mary Astor's boyfriend away from her. But then Don Amici shows up and complications ensue. One of my absolute favorite movies, directed by Mitchell Leeson, co-written by Billy Wilder.
Cool.
I wish it were more available, but it's one of my all-time favorites.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I will seek that out. A couple of those I have not seen before, so I will definitely check those out. Some of my runners-up, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, like the one and only Screwball Comedy by Alfred Hitchcock, I really love.
So good. Again, Carol Lombard.
Yeah,
very,
I think
funny.
her second to last film before her tragic death.
I think so. Yeah, it was definitely
41
in her career. Yeah, there's a restaurant scene in that movie and a Ferris wheel scene in that movie that always have me howling.
Yeah, it's like the one of the very few comedies that Alfred Hitchcock made, and which I find really interesting. Like, it's not a film you think of when you think of Hitchcock.
Yeah, it's not even like a suspense comedy. It's just straight up like she wanted him to do it, and
he wanted him to make it. Yeah,
and it's really good.
So that's really cool. And then I'm a huge Billy Wilder fan, of course. And in college, I watched 1, 2, 3 from '61, which I enjoyed. That was a fun kind of screwball comedy. So yeah, my favorites would be Some Like It Hot, which I just adore. Bringing Up Baby, and my favorite that I watched in college for the first time on the big screen with the print, it looked amazing. The Philadelphia Story from 1940. It's just one of the great movies. I love that movie.
Are we counting that as Screwball?
Is that not Screwball?
I don't know. I think of that more as sort of like a, it
was on a list. I was looking at a list of screwball comedies. And
I think of it as more of a dring room comedy, But,
okay. I mean, it opens with a screwball moment for sure. Like when she pushes him,
and she has a big drunk scene. I mean, a case could be made, but sure. It's funny. 1, 2, 3. I had a great opportunity to see that movie in East Berlin.
Oh wow!
It's a movie that is about the Berlin Wall and the sort of like farcical stuff happening around that. So the one time I was in Berlin for the film festival, East Berlin is now this very kind of chic part of town, and one of the things that I discovered was this brand new state-of-the-art movie theater inside a very old Soviet era building. So like from the outside, it just looks like this big block, and then you go in, it's this beautiful new movie theater, and they were showing Eins, Zwei, Drei. And I thought, I can't not see this movie in East Berlin, even though it was showing dubbed in German. So I took two friends of mine. I took my friend who lives in Berlin and who speaks fluent German, and then my other friend we were both there at the same time, and she and I spoke not a lick of German, but I had seen the movie before in English. Neither of them had ever seen it, and we all laughed. Because even if you don't know anything that's being said, just there's so much great physical comedy, and like Wilder is so good at like creating these characters with these very kind of quirky ways of behavior that even without the words, it's still hilarious.
1, 2, 3. It's not one of the more well-known Billy Wilder films, but I really enjoy that one. Do we consider It Happened One Night a screwball comedy from '34? It's kind of on the cusp.
It is a runaway heiress, so I mean, it has some, it in Philadelphia certainly contain elements in terms of like the sort of, rich people often in, clashing with like regular folks and the sort of complications that ensue. I think of screwball comedies as being a little more faster paced. Like His Girl Friday is a very fast-paced comedy. I don't know if it counts as Screwball because it's a workplace comedy.
Oh, okay.
So but these are blurry lines at best. So
but every year I pick an actor to study their whole filmography. This year I've chosen Cary Grant. So I'm gonna there's a lot of his early films I've never seen before. So I'm excited. I know he's in a bunch of screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s, right? So I'm excited to get to more of his work. Yeah.
But that's have you gotten to Sylvia Scarlett yet?
No. I just watched his debut and it was kind of rough. That's the only one I've watched so far.
Well, you've got a couple of Mae West movies coming up on your radar as well.
Okay, very cool. Nice. All right, that takes us to the end here, Alonso. Thank you so much for being back on Film at 50. Always a treat to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to promote and tell our listeners where they can find you online? You're all over the place. You have so many great podcasts. I love your writing. Just really fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter at @Duralde, ADURALDE, that's where I post links to everything. I'm the film reviews editor at The Wrap and write reviews there. And I'm co-host of the Linoleum Knife, Breakfast All Day, Maximum Film, and occasionally Deck the Hallmark podcast. So I'll have links to all that stuff on my Twitter. So yeah, check it out.
Do you ever get a chance to sleep?
Not nearly enough.
Yeah, we'll definitely check that out. So thanks so much for being here, Alonso. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And check out my new YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, where I'm doing lots of videos about Oscar history and careers of actors that I love. So check that out, Brian Rowe Video. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.